Hi, I'm Rebecca from Flourishing Childhood, and I'm on the Executive Council of the International Attachment Network. I'm thrilled to be hosting a series of hopeful conversations to support families and schools to strengthen attachment during COVID-19. The International Attachment Network promotes a fundamental role of attachment theory in all aspects of human connection. They advocate and educate on its application for improved outcomes in the fields of psychological health, healthcare, social care, education, public policy, and beyond. Established in 1992 by close colleagues of John Bowlby, the founder of attachment theory, the Attachment Network is a membership-based educational charity led by experienced clinicians and academics in the field of attachment theory. Headquartered in the UK, they have a growing active presence in the world. So today I'm really happy because I'm here to welcome Nicola Jones, who will be speaking to us. I'd just like to share a little bit about Nicola. She has been working as a relationship therapist since 2006. She qualified with Relate and has set up her own private practice in Bristol area, working with individuals, couples, and families. She also delivers a range of training to other therapists and has recently developed her own training course for taking on an attachment-informed approach to working therapeutically with couples. She is a vice chair and executive committee member of the International Attachment Network. Today, Nicola will be sharing some of what she's experiencing of the impact of COVID pandemic on relationships and why it is so important to pay attention to our relationships. She'll discuss how attention to the parent relationship is essential for well-being of the whole family, identifying some of the symptoms of relationships under stress and what can be done. A list of resources for your continued reflection will be accompanying the interview. Welcome, Nicola.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that introduction. Thank you, and thank you for taking the time for doing this for the International Attachment Network and all those who hopefully benefit from this.
Could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, well, you've said that I've worked with couples since 2006, and I worked and trained with Relate, and I came to learn of attachment theory from the outset, but its real relevance has become very, very obvious to me, and particularly as it concerns my couples clients, because of its whole focus on relationship and connection. And my own therapy, effectively, as well as my study and my supervision, has led me to appreciate the central importance of attachment theory, which I'll be going on to just explain a little bit. So attachment is something of a technical term, but I hope to break it down. But the theory essentially, it confirms that our well-being and our ability to flourish depends on having trusted and supportive relationships. It's about having strong connections. And of course, that's what couples relationships all about. And under these circumstances, of course, what we're seeing is people being put into situations they've never experienced before, and that is stressful. And that inevitably is going to put stress on the relationship. As soon as the relationship is stressed, then the connection weakens and sometimes breaks down. And that need for connection is so fundamental that the corresponding breakdown of a relationship is going to fundamentally affect the well-being of the couple and obviously of the children.
Yeah.
So we will look at some of the ways in which offers some approaches to managing these problems and identifying the problems and bringing them out into the open so people don't feel as though they're the only ones experiencing these.
Yes, that's amazing, because I support parents and families, and lots of parents have been approaching me with help. What can we do? We've had the most monumentous arguments. How can we support our children through this?
Yes.
But it might be nice just to start a bit with briefly explaining attachment and why it's important in relationships, especially at this time.
Yes. So to put it into a nutshell, as you've mentioned, John Bowlby formulated attachment theory, and he put the concept of our need for a secure base at the heart of this work. Effectively, having a secure base means that we can feel grounded, we can feel safe, and that enables us to do everything else in our lives and to lead a really productive life, and that contributes to our well-being. And he was an absolute pioneer, and his work was grounded in so many disciplines. And animal research was sort of ahead of the state of psychotherapy and psychology at the time. And looking at research with animals, it became really clear that our first need, because we share, the human behaviour is shared with some of the other animal kingdom, the mammals, that the first need is not for food, but for comfort, for the comfort and presence of a supportive other. And that word support is huge. What does it mean? So I hope to break that down into some practical terms so people know what to do. Mm-hmm. So returning to what attachment is, the theory all started out with infants. And the healthy distress that infants show when they're separated from their caregiver. And this is an instinctive behaviour of infants, they're born with it. And the idea is they signal their distress, they communicate with bodily gestures, with their eyes, with their smiling, with their cries, and they keep that caregiver close, and when the caregiver is away and is needed, typically the mother, then the mother tunes into what the child needs and provides those needs. And I think it's important, because it does tie in with adult relationships later on, to notice that the presence of the mother tuning into the infant is important, but it's also important for the caregiver to notice when the infant has had enough, when they're overstimulated, and the infant will look away, they'll look down, the eyes will change, and they've had enough. And that's really important too, because those periods of rest and time for ourselves are as important as engagement, and it all interacts. Quality of our engagement depends on having those periods of rest, and that is so fascinating to see. And there's it's quite an old video of a man called Colwyn Trevarthen, who's done amazing research, really acutely observing these interactions. And I'll put that onto the list of resources, right, where you see this pattern of interaction that is so finely tuned. He sees it as a piece of music, this interaction between mother and baby, and one can see the detail that a lot of which happens below the level of our awareness.
Beautiful. I have this little memory as you speaking of my daughter having all of our family members coming to visit, and even though I've done a lot about attachment with your own children, sometimes it's very hard to really see those subtleties, and she had the biggest cry that night, just huge emotion, and I think we just missed those cues throughout the day that she'd just had enough, so yeah, it's really beautiful to see.
Yes, and of course it's so hard for parents to see it all. And there are statistics, I think there's so much pressure on parents, but it's so important to know there's a concept of good enough parenting. And infants do not need perfect parenting. That is really, they really don't need that.
I really like Brene Brown's book. She wrote The Gifts of Imperfect Parenting.
Oh, really?
It's really lovely, yes.
Yes, in fact, she's somebody that I quote because her work is so approachable and such good quality and so comprehensive.
Wonderful.
So coming back, I was talking about Colwyn Trevarthen and this short video which illustrates these interactions between the mother and child. And there is a great deal more to these interactions than the physical interaction, because the infant's emotional development and ultimately their ability to interact well with others depends on the quality of these interactions. And this is where you start to see the links with adult couple relationships, which I'll come on to.
Speaking of which, so you've spoken, I'm just having checked which question I wanted to ask next, actually. So having talked about the attachment theory and relating to infants, how is this then relevant to adults?
Yes. So Bowlby's work was largely focused on, it was really exclusively focused on infants and also on adolescents. But he realised that our need for this for us to feel safe and secure in our relationships and in ourselves was a need that exists across our lifetime. And he coined this phrase, from cradle to grave. So this has been taken up and researched so extensively ever since. But he is known. He said that, he predicted that we have these needs, and we now know this is very true. And the safety and security one feels in an adult relationship is an important part of love. And I say that because I think we all know love can have these very romantic connotations, which is wonderful, but it also has this sense of predictability, consistency, being able to depend on our partners, to have this feeling of safety. The reason for this sense of safety and security is because that's when we can feel in touch with ourselves. It's where we can feel in touch with ourselves and in touch with other people. And it is a state of being emotionally regulated. So I try to stay away from some of these technical terms, but this term emotional regulation, which means to be in a good place, effectively, to be in a good place, to be quite happy with oneself, to feel supported, and to have a good network and a good relationship. Because this presentation, I hasten to add, is about partners and partners as parents. So that my focus will be about two people in a relationship. So this emotional regulation is essential. And we have to feel safe and secure for that. So I'll say more about that later.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yes. So in terms of the research, there's an enormous body of research now. One of the strengths of attachment is that it's constantly keeping up to date, and it crosses so many disciplines. In some ways, neuroscience is now telling us what John Bowlby already knew from his observations and research himself, but it crosses social sciences, medicine, research on adult relationships, and infant development, and more.
Wonderful.
The other point that I want to draw out here is that what's happening between the mother and infant is a care-seeking and a caregiving relationship. And that care-seeking and caregiving also is replicated in adult relationships in a very different way, because the mother gives to the child far more, obviously, than the child gives to the parent. The child does give to the parent, but it's not mutually reciprocal, as you'd expect with a little infant. But with adult relationships, this caregiving and care-seeking continues to be really important. And it's important, particularly at this time, I'm finding, where everybody's roles are changing. The parents are becoming our teachers. They have their children with them all of the time. They're sometimes trying to balance their work. But the caregiving role now has probably, for many people, been quite significantly changed. And it's probably being shared at the moment very differently to how it normally is. Mm. And I think that this is one of the transitions that couples have had to make overnight, no preparation. And it needs time to stop and think about it. And that's what I want to encourage partners to stop and think about, really, what has changed. Because as I will say, if we don't stop and reflect and become aware of what's different, what we're dealing with here, well, we can't really do anything about it. So that period of reflection is important. And I would like to encourage listeners to maybe even pause at certain points in this presentation to think about, okay, I really do need to spend some time reflecting on this now or at another time, and really use this as an ongoing reference for themselves throughout these weeks.
Wonderful. And I'm just wondering, can you talk a bit about how these relationships are going to look like? Sometimes our partners depend on feelings of safety and security. How does that look?
Well, that's very interesting, Rebecca, because I'm sure you'll know what I mean when I say we often take it for granted. We take for granted what we've got, and we don't realise what we've got until we've lost it. So I think I'm coming to this in a different way, because we're looking at the stresses that people are likely to be under at the moment, and so I think they're going to know that things don't feel good in a variety of ways. So to come back to your question, the answer is that people want to know that their partner's there for them when they're in distress, when they're under stress, and more than usual now, and in different ways, couples need one another. So they need to be effectively, the answer is they need to be in a trusted relationship. And I'm going to break that down into a number of components based on the work of Brené Brown, who, in a video that will be in the resources, talks very much about, more about this, but she breaks trust down into the acronym BRAVING, BRAVING, and I'll go through that. So we do get to look at what a trusted relationship, which will then feel safe and secure, looks like.
Yes, because it's very hard. Not only have some relationships already been in a stressful situation,
Yes.
they're then put into this, expanded stress. So it's really useful to have something that you can refer to and work on together, really. So this sounds like a good way to do it.
Yes. So I certainly got that later on in our interview. And just to go back to the question that you were asking me about how this relates to infants, how this relates to adults, I'm sorry.
Yes.
There are two sources of our security, and one is within ourselves and the other one is from our external environment. And feeling that sense of trust in ourselves is an enormous area, really important, but it's not what I'm focusing on today. So what we're focusing on today is how to have that support from our external environment, and primarily our partner, but not exclusively our partner. And again, that's something that I will mention and touch on later. So again, you asked about what is it that people want, and I said, well, it's so easy to take for granted what we've got, and we know what we want when we haven't got it. So I want to talk a little bit about the importance of close relationships, because we do live in a society which doesn't value relationships. It actually promotes individuality. And there are people who've written about this. There's a study I shall talk about. There's a book that Sue Gerhardt wrote, The Selfish Society, Why We've Stopped Loving One Another and Made Money Instead. You know, there are these powerful societal forces that overtake us in spite of ourselves and set up conflicts, because we're out in the world one minute with those values and then we're back in the family. We know what we really want, but how do people marry the conflicting values? And it's not a topic I'm going to go into, but I wanted to touch on that, and there's more in the references that will accompany this. So the importance of having close relationships in the first place, and their ability to be trusted to provide support at times such as this, is backed up by considerable research. So it might be making the obvious point, but I've said why I think this needs emphasis. There's a study which Richard Waldinger talks about, a 75-year study following people for 75 years through their lives, that found that good relationships keep us happier and healthier. I think that's a very strong message in today's world, where we're looking at exactly that, health and happiness, and no amount of money is going to make us healthier. So that is a study where he emphasizes the importance of healthy relationships. That's included in the resources. And the opposite, of course, of these good, happy relationships is a concept I want to mention, which is about loneliness, but not physical loneliness, as is often talked about, but this idea of psychological loneliness. And it isn't something that people think about. They know they don't feel supported. They know they feel overwhelmed. They know they feel angry, or they've given up and they're feeling despairing and lacking in hope. But what's often going on here is that they don't feel there's anybody they can talk to. They don't really know what's going on. And it's what's called psychological loneliness. And the statistics on loneliness are phenomenal. Now, Brené Brown, again, in her book, Braving the Wilderness, she quotes statistics. She talks about the increases the odds of dying by, with obesity, 20%, excessive drinking, 30%, and loneliness, 40%. I mean, that's shocking.
It's such a huge statistic.
Yes. She's not talking about psychological loneliness. But I know from my work that, well, we hear it said, don't we, that you can be more lonely in a bad relationship than on your own.
Yeah, and I
So,
think very prevalent with parents and children, especially if you're parenting in such a different way, it can feel extremely lonely and yeah.
yes, yes. We'll talk about the quality of the parents' relationship because, as you said in the introduction, again, there seems to be such an emphasis, and there's so many pressures on parents to be perfect parents. I think social media contributes to this pressure. But what's overlooked, seriously overlooked, is the quality of the parents' relationship. So I'll talk about that and the research that backs up what I say.
Wonderful. Would you be able to go on a little bit about the braving, with Brené Brown about her definition of trust?
Yes, yes. So that sense of trust is from one's external environment, from one's partner, is that sense that if I need my partner, he or she is there for me. That's really what it is. And her definition of trust is really comprehensive, supported by her research, and it's summed up by this acronym BRAVING, where the B stands for boundaries. I'm going to sort of put this in my own words, but she obviously puts her research behind it in the video that will be in the resources. So she says the B stands for boundaries, and the boundaries are really knowing your limits, your partner knowing their limits, being able to take time to know how you're feeling. And then the importance of knowing how you feel is because it'll tell you what you need. So that is so important. I'll talk about it a bit now because this is what we can do, and perhaps I focused a bit too much on the problems up to now. But what I do with my clients when I'm talking to them about their feelings and their needs is I use a framework called nonviolent communication, which was created by Marshall Rosenberg. It's a wonderfully simple framework, but it's not easy. And he has this 4-step framework, which I'll talk about later on. But step 2 and step 3 is about identifying as clearly as possible how you feel. And the importance of that is if you know how you feel, then you know what you need. And without knowing exactly what you feel, it's really hard to work out what you need. So just to give you an example, if you're in a really frustrating situation and you're feeling frustrated or angry, well, that's not really very helpful. When you think about it, you might think what's triggered this anger? I'm not being sufficiently appreciated. Yeah, I am not being listened. I don't feel listened to. Okay, so I need to feel listened to, and I need appreciation. Once you know that, you can ask for it.
Yeah.
Yes?
It's really such a beautiful technique. And actually, what's quite useful, if you do just go into Google and you put in nonviolent communication needs or nonviolent communication feelings, you can get a whole list there. And it's quite useful because sometimes you only pinpoint one feeling, but there's kind of a range of feelings and needs we have. So it's quite a useful resource to have.
Yes, yes. And what we'll often feel when our needs aren't being met are those feelings we call negative emotions, but they are so important. So important not to ignore them.
Yeah.
Easy to ignore them because they're usually uncomfortable, but so important not to. And again, under the resources, I've included Marshall Rosenberg's 3-hour workshop on nonviolent communication, along with a list of needs, because it's not something that we tend to think about. What are my needs? So I've put that in as an extra resource. So coming back to the B for boundaries, it's about standing up for yourself. So you need to know what you need in order to stand up for yourself and be able to communicate that effectively. And of course, that effective communication is not done in a way that we would call sort of negative conflict. And I'll talk more about conflict. The R is for reliability, consistency, knowing that that person is there. I hadn't known whether to talk about this, but what I suppose it is important to flag it, which is that if there has been in the past in this particular relationship, or even in past relationships or in early childhood, a time when a person was really let down, really badly let down, and I'm not going to talk about abuse or anything like that, but let down, that leaves a sort of sensitivity. what happens is that when those feelings come back, so they feel the same feelings, they're sort of what Una McCluskey would call lookalikes, then the potential for those to cause an overreaction is there. And I find that clients say to me, I don't know why I reacted so strongly. And I say, well, this is the problem. This is what's happening here. There's some stuff coming in from your past that you haven't realized because it's you've forgotten about it. But there's an accumulation of those feelings with what's just happened now. And that's what's causing you to react more strongly. And I think it's so important to know that, because we're so quick to criticize ourselves. Sometimes I'm a bad person. I've shouted too loudly at my child, or why did I say that to my partner? When you realize that this isn't just about the now, but there's the past that comes in at such times, that things can be re-triggered, it does help us understand that. So what made me think about that is that if you have been let down in the past, it's so important to have this reliability where time after time after time you have this sense that somebody is there for you. And if they've really let you down badly in the past, that might be coming up.
Yeah.
And my advice right now is not to tackle big problems, but does help to know it's there, perhaps, so you can pick it up afterwards. Because a general rule of thumb with all of this is really don't make things worse right now. If something can be parked, park it.
My husband and I have got a new saying. We call it, it's a coronavirus thing.
Okay. What does that mean?
A massive explosion, and then we just go, okay, it's a coronavirus thing.
Great, yes.
And just move on. And, maybe when we've calmed down later, we could maybe tackle it then.
Yes. Well, I think that's spot on, Rebecca. Yeah, because there's just so much demanding attention from partners now who are parents. So accountability. And that's taking responsibility for one's own feelings and reactions and staying out of judgment and blame. Talk a bit more about that later. Vault is the V, confidentiality. You really need to know that what you say to somebody isn't going to get passed on, know? And then there's integrity, non-judgment, and generosity. So we can't focus on all of that, but that's what braving is. And I think that everybody will have a sense of what trust means for them, because what's important for them will come into what trust means. It is to some degree determined by what one's own values are, but I think there's always that sense of safety and security that's needed. That's always going to be a part of trust.
Yes, thank you so much. This is so interesting. I have another question for you. You said so that our external environment will affect our sense of safety and security. So that's obviously really evident in dealing with the consequences of the coronavirus. How do you think this relates to our audience?
The effects of the coronavirus. Well, what I've done is I've thought about what's coming up in my work at the moment. So I've made a list here, and you will see that I am reading from some of my notes because I don't want to overlook some of the points. But what I'm hearing from my clients and in the news, of course, is the pressure of engaging with children all day long and becoming their teachers. And there's a change in roles taking place. Whenever we have transitions, everything changes. Human nature does not adapt to change. And this has been put on us in a very rapidly. It's shocking, actually. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that this has all been a shock. And I use that word, which I again come back to. Seeing the impact on our children of the sudden change in their routine, I've seen with one of our little grandchildren that, I think he's a bit confused why he's not seeing his granddad. And he's ignoring him. He's turning his back on the phone, and that's his way of saying, I don't know what's going on. I don't know why I'm not seeing you. I mean, how sad. They're missing their playmates. They're but tragically, those that can't get outside or in very limited ways. How lucky are we if we have a garden or a woodland close by? But that is denying children their need to move. It's so important. Then there's the fear of illness. There's the fear of death, of those close to us. And then just worrying about money, about work, security of one's job, and housing. The other thing is that I have a few clients who work in the NHS, and that's brought up, as I'm sure it does for other reasons, conflicts of values. You know, when we're not in crisis, there's nothing's perfect. But when we're in crisis, the things that aren't perfect become so exaggerated. And what I've seen is that there's been real dialogues and difficulties around different value systems, depending on what job. If somebody's at the front line, at the front line of supporting patients, and then they're coming home and being with their partners and their children, I think that the clash of value systems becomes evident. And of course, this can all be talked about.
Yes.
Because what we're talking about here also is a lack of control. And going back to that idea of safety and security, we all need a degree of control over our lives. And that's essential. And what's happened now is that we're in a place where so much is out of our control. And I have spent time with most of my clients talking about how do they create that control. So it can be created, and I can come on to that.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, because actually going back to Marshall Rosenberg's needs, power and autonomy is kind of a vital human need. And often when children are misbehaving, it's because they lack that control and power in their lives.
Okay, yes.
So, yeah,
you know that a lot from your work, Rebecca, with parents and their parenting. Yes, it's not where I work. Obviously, one talks about parenting, but that's your area of that's your work, isn't it?
Yes. Thank you. So, what can be done, and in what order? The big question.
So, I have got two very important points to make about order. And as I said, two very important points. And the first one is to talk about this concept of emotional regulation. So I've said that this has really shocked us. It will have affected people in differing degrees, but the majority of people will be experiencing some state of shock. And most people will be familiar with the terms fight, flight, and freeze. Perhaps fight and flight, maybe not freeze. It's a really important one. So when we talk about emotional regulation, we tend to think calm down. Yes. So when we're emotionally dysregulated, we tend to think of people being angry, anxious, frightened. Yeah. Which is part of it. And we then think, well, we need to calm down. There's an important other side to emotional regulation, and that is where people go into avoidance and denial and they switch off. And what's important about this, but hard about it, is that it's hard to identify. You can tell an angry person, you can tell a frightened person and an anxious person usually, because it's evident in their body language and how they're speaking. It's not easy to spot somebody who's in denial and avoidance and who might have switched off. So with that type of emotional dysregulation, those people need more structure. They need to be brought back to life. They need to be energized. So you can see why I don't talk about emotional regulation as calming down, because it can be the opposite to those people who need to be energized. So that's the going back to the priority of things. The first place is emotional regulation. And when anybody is in that fight, flight, freeze, so you are super busy, completely distracted, not stopping for a minute, or getting very frustrated with yourself or everybody around you, or you're really frightened and you have lots of frightening thoughts. One of the, I've come up with my own little what's it called? Acronym. BEAT, beat. Let's beat this. So where B stands for, let me think here, because body. B stands for body. I wanted to say behavior, but I've got another one for that. B stands for body, E stands for emotions, A stands for activities, our activity, our behavior, and T stands for thoughts. And our body, our emotions, our activities, our behavior, and our thoughts all interact. So if we're frightened, we're going to act in frightened ways. Our body's going to hold it. We're going to think frightening things. And I think that's very, very helpful, because in order to get this sense of control, we need to make sense of what's happening to us.
Yeah.
So when we can link things up we become more integrated, we get that sense of control, and then we can go, right, now I understand that. Now I can do something about it. Now I can understand. I'm in that emotionally regulated place. So when we're not in the emotionally regulated place, we can't think clearly. We don't connect to our bodies. We can't read ourselves well. We read other people badly. We misinterpret what our partner's saying, for example. And chaos ensues. And it's not good for any of us. So the first priority is that you can't make good decisions. You can't have good communication you can't tune into yourself, identify what's wrong. You can't communicate effectively with your partner. You can't listen to what they're saying well, unless you're in that place of calm, feeling safe and secure. So that's the first priority for me. Forget it. I say to my clients, if you're going in a spiral that's downwards, having a fight, the only thing you can do, easy to say, but the only thing you can do is stop it. And calm down or energize, whatever, depending on how people react. The second priority is, and maybe I should come back to this acronym BEAT and talk a little bit more about it. But I'll go on to the second priority, maybe Rebecca first.
Wonderful, yes. Then we'll come back to the BEAT, yeah?
Yes, yeah. And the second priority is the importance of the adult relationship. So I've already said that I think society, in its many ways, keeps saying to parents, you can do this better, you can be better, and the guilt and the weight of being a good parent is not good for our well-being, because it causes stress, lots of pressure, and we have lots of negative thinking about ourselves. So many parents devote their time to the needs of their children to the detriment of their relationship. And this is the wrong way around. Now, I am not advocating child neglect, okay? What I'm about to say is that if the parents look after themselves, that's for the good of the family.
Yeah.
And it comes back to this matter of emotional regulation as well. So, but for a detailed discussion as why, there's an interview between the two researchers, Carolyn and Philip Cowan, and Christopher Clulow, which will be on the resources. What is absolutely essential for the well-being of children is an emotionally regulated environment. They don't thrive on seeing their parents continue to cycle through the same old patterns of conflict, where one gets angry and the other one storms off, or one gets angry and the other one gets angry, and you have this escalating conflict, whatever. Children these days, they'll say, Mummy and Daddy, I really don't like it when you fight.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm being quite heterosexual there, but whoever their parents are, children don't like it.
Yeah.
And I'm amazed.
And actually, when you look at their bodies, you can tell, when my husband and I have an argument, they, one of them runs off and the other one, her whole body gets agitated. It's like, she picks up on all those feelings. And it's so hard when you're stuck in there, you don't want to let go,
Yes.
But just, noticing your child will maybe help you also to just remove yourself and calm down or release.
Yeah. And the thing is, conflict's unavoidable.
Yeah.
But the intensity of it and the repetitiveness and the stuckness of it is what's the problem. And what we know from research is that to have conflict, but to see it managed, conflict's essential, but it can be managed, and I'll talk more about that if we've got the time, is the repair.
Yes.
And if children see the parents repairing, they get this sense that conflict's okay, it's normal, and it can be repaired. And there is such a thing as apology, Yeah. So let me just see, going back to the parents' relationship, that it's essential for the well-being of the children. So parents really need to say, okay, it's all right if they have 15 minutes, half an hour watching the TV while my husband and I, my partner and I play a game, talk to each other, have a cup of tea, go and sit in the garden. Obviously you keep your children safe. Time just for them. And that's really good for the children to see too. Now, there is a warning I want to give here, which is so important with couples work, that we hear of the increase in domestic violence. It's very prevalent already. But what is absolutely essential here is that you do not take steps to work on your relationship if you are in an abusive relationship. If you are frightened, you don't change anything. You already know how to keep going. You already know probably how to keep the situation safe. Very stressful, but you've got to keep going like that. And if you can get to the telephone, there is a telephone number and a national helpline, and I've got the telephone number here. It's 0808 2000 247. So please do not make a situation worse if you are already frightened. Maintain things as they are. So yeah. Shall I go back to the beat, the body, the emotions, the actions, and the thinking? So just to give you an idea, to put some everyday language around this, with the body, you'll feel headaches, you might feel tight in your chest, you might feel a knot in your stomach, you might feel a lump in your stomach. So if you stop and think, you can sort of quickly do a bit of a body scan and see where that stress is. And that's in itself really helpful. If you can't actually think about how you are feeling, if you can't put words on those feelings, just knowing where it is in your body, and then doing things like breathing and really taking time for yourself. And again, I'd encourage you, if for those listening, take time and know you've got to look after yourself, as well as look for support from your partner and your extended network.
Yeah, I think that's where that sort of boundaries comes in as well, of Brené's, because sometimes you have to set that boundary for yourself, because sometimes the other person doesn't realize, so set that boundary and make sure, I need to do this, or I need to go for that walk, or, making sure that you can have that space.
That is so, so important. The exercise, the time for oneself, the ability to focus on one's work.
Yeah.
And it brings me to some conversations I've been having with this idea of what can you control, and there's a variety of responses. But two are that some people say we're making the picture smaller. We're focusing on what we can do within our family and looking after our family and being in the garden and growing and whatever. And then others say actually it's helpful to think of what's this going to do for us. It depends on what your work is as well as your personality and your values and your interests. But it can help to think, what am I going to take from this? Or what can I do more of in terms of my interests right now? And important if you're working, to be able to do your work. It gives you a bit of a break.
And it's great for children to see as well that you are, doing different things and trying different things. They're more likely to come and join in with you as well. So
yes. So the body, yes, and then the emotions of, I think there's a lot of fear, probably, sadness, feeling overwhelmed, angry, difficulty switching off, or people actually switching off and going into that place of denial, and the inability to feel any pleasure and having nothing to look forward to. So two things here. Really try and bring as much pleasure in as possible. Connect with your friends. Really important to do this via video links if you can. So important to see a person's face, to see their eyes. Really, really important to see them smiling.
Yeah.
And the other, so that's one thing, is the importance of finding pleasure where you can, and people are doing online games and connecting up with Zoom and so on. The other thing is that there are some feelings that are a bit misleading, like anger. You've really got to stop and think about, why am I angry? Anger in itself is really, really important, but so often it covers hurt. It covers a sense of being overwhelmed or being let down, And in order to get to those needs, you've got to work out what it is that you're actually feeling. And anger can be a good go-to, a sort of a shortcut, and it's confusing. So then there are the actions, and there's the sort of active and the passive, which I've mentioned. We can blame, we can withdraw, we can overdo, go around like headless chickens, and that doesn't help, because then we feel like we've not achieved anything. We can't focus, we can't relax, and we certainly can't listen. So we're in fight, flight, and freeze. Then the thoughts, these can be black and white, never going to change. And things aren't ever going to be good again. It's really important not to use this black and white thinking, because it's so rarely the case. And all it does is it makes us more frightened. This relentless thinking, catastrophizing. I won't be able to keep my children safe. My partner might have a heart attack and leave me alone. I might end up on my own. My children are going to be irreversibly affected by this. Nobody understands how I feel. Really very strong thoughts that are probably not true. And it's very easy for me to say this, but there are ways to manage these thoughts. And I think I haven't put it in the resources, but I shall do. I'll add the work of Kristin Neff and Chris Germer, who have lots of resources on their websites about mindfulness and how to manage this relentless ruminating thinking that comes from a place of fear. I can understand where it comes from. And in terms of what that does to the relationship is that we see anger, conflict, judgment, lack of understanding, misinterpretation, assumptions being made. I feel terrible when you say that, so you must have meant to hurt me. No, that was an assumption and an interpretation, and not true necessarily. So don't, check it out, be curious. So important in this time to be curious. What is going on? Don't assume.
It's
So when we're under stress, sorry, Rebecca.
It's so interesting you say that, because my husband and I had quite a bad day the one day, and then when we sat down at the end of the day, I suddenly just went, I feel really scared. And I'd literally torn his head off all day long.
Okay, you were scared.
And I was then able to finally, I think because obviously the children got to really think how I felt. That's what it was down to.
How did you work out? I mean, it might be just useful as an example, if you don't mind. How did you figure out you were scared?
Oh, well, I came into the news being on.
Oh, yes.
And I don't really watch it. I watch it once a week and it was on, and I realised that it just kind of was quite evident. That's how I was feeling underneath all those things,
And then you were able to tell him?
Yes. And it's just so lovely once you're able to, it's that kind of feeling a need, able to then express it, meant you went, oh, come here, so it really helped. And it felt like all the stuff that had happened in the day doesn't matter anymore, because we knew what the problem was.
That's an example of you taking responsibility for your feelings.
And
it transformed your relationship. Didn't it? It dissolved all that bad feeling, because he could. You opened yourself up. That braving the connection that Brené Brown talks about. Yes. And so I've been talking about the impact of all this stress personally, and there's also the impact of the stress on the relationship. And I think you asked me earlier, what does it look like? What are the signs? And again, this is a time for listeners to make a point, I think, to stop and think, because you've got to give this stuff attention. You've got to become more aware, otherwise you can't do anything with it. So the giving it attention and becoming more aware gives you control. Okay, so what you might identify are patterns of conflict. She shouts, I walk out. I close down. She shouts, I shout louder. Then we bring up all the old hurts from the past. Who knows? But there'll be anger, withdrawal. There's a loss of connection. That's frightening, because that's essential for our safety. And we know that deep, deep down from the moment we're born. There's little sharing. The pleasure isn't there in life anymore. And there's a breakdown in trust. And that's to name just a few. Conflict and anger are interesting words. Some people say, no, conflict. No, it's not mature. It's not a grown-up thing to do. I hear that. Angry, I don't see the point of getting angry. Well, then you really need to look back into your past to see where those messages come from, because anger is essential. It's essential to keep us safe. When it's anger in its pure form, it tells us something's wrong. It tells us that usually we're psychologically not feeling safe. And conflict is inevitable. So anybody who says, we need to grow up and there's no need for conflict, there's such a thing as good conflict that can be managed. So I'm going to give a few tips, but I don't know whether I've got time here in terms of talking about two particular areas, which was about talking about feelings and needs, which I think I've covered enough, but about conflict and giving a few pointers. Do I have time?
Yes, if that's okay with you, Nicola, we can just extend this a little bit. I know we were initially wanted to do shorter time, but I'd really love to hear about it, and I'm sure the audience would like to hear.
Yeah, okay, yes. So the two things I wanted to talk about was managing conflict or avoidance of conflict, and talking about feelings and needs. So just briefly about feelings and needs, I've talked about Marshall Rosenberg's work. There's also in the resource something which is a link to Nancy Klein's 10 thinking elements. And when I listen to it, it has so much there about listening. You and I discussed we might do a separate interview on listening. It's so huge.
Yes.
So that might come. But in the meantime, there is this link to 10 thinking elements. And that's very helpful for listening, because listening, people think they listen, they hear the words, but that's not listening. It's so much more. Then
it's one of the hardest things in the world.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm not going too quickly. I can get quite passionate about all of this, and there's so much I really want to convey here. Anyway, moving on to conflict, or avoidance of conflict, which is just as bad, because conflict, you put two people in a room, there's difference. There's conflict. Of course there is. So an excellent exercise is individually for each person to record what makes for good communication and what makes for bad communication, thinking particularly of your own experiences. Once you've done this, then you can discuss it. Now, going back to don't make anything worse, if this escalates conflict, or you start to feel frightened or really angry, out of control in any way, stop it.
Yeah.
You know that rule, that priority, get back to feeling emotionally regulated, whatever it takes, okay? Because you can't have any effective communication unless you're in that place. So it's essential, therefore, that you don't talk off the back of a row, because you're going to feel, there's going to be lots of emotions going on in your body. You need to find the right time and the place, and you don't want to be tired, and you don't need distractions. You want the children comfortably settled in front of a movie or in bed, and you don't want your television on, ideally, or your telephone. Those are basics. If there's a lot of anger or withdrawal or general defensiveness, it's not possible to have these good conversations. Just reiterating that point. So when I'm working with clients and giving them this exercise, I'll start them off. So I'll say, don't interrupt one another. Try and listen without thinking of yourself. Listen and be curious. That curious is so important, because it's so easy to listen to another person saying, I feel really bad at this time, and it'll trigger the listener thinking, oh, I did that. Oh, I don't mean to do that. No, forget yourself.
Yeah.
Just be curious. Why? What caused it? How often does this happen? Tell me a bit more what it feels like. Avoid trigger words. To give you an example, you are just like your father or your mother. Oh my goodness, that is usually not a good start. You always do that. You never listen to me. These absolute words are real. Where do you go with them? You've got nowhere to go with them, so the conversation ends. So please identify and stop using them. Never threaten to end the relationship. I can't tell you the damage that does. When we talk about the need for consistent presence of a trusted other, you tell them that you've had enough and you're off. When this is over, I'm leaving. Can't take any more. Well, the trust has gone out of the window, and it's going to take a long time to build it back. So really think carefully about, I've had enough, can't take any more. What you're really signaling is this relationship is not what I want. Profoundly frightening. So walking off, this is okay as long as you come back. If to walk off and take time out is a way of getting back into that nice, emotionally regulated place, do it. But keep your partner informed. I'll come back as soon, agree this in your sort of guidelines for good communication. Say, I'll be coming back as soon as I can. And if I need to walk outside, obviously we can't walk too far, I'll text you to let you know I'm on my way back or when I'm ready, sort of thing. Stay in contact if you can. So, rule of thumb, don't make anything worse. Just stop and resume when you can take the time to feel less reactive. And yes, then I say to them, just think about this communication for yourself, because it's important that this is about you, not my list of rules. Yeah.
That's very useful. I mean, I can identify all the things that I do shouldn't be doing in that.
Oh, yes.
But really nice to be able to listen to with your partner and work on these things. Because
that does bring me to an important point, Rebecca.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but that is such an important point, that what you've been doing, you've probably been doing for decades. So it is really important you don't expect overnight transformation here. I've just said to one of my clients, she says, well, so I've got to change this. And I said, just make it a lifelong journey. You now know which direction, you've got the map, use it, do not expect yourself to change overnight or even in the next month. Aim for sort of 5%. Aim for 5% of improvement. If you do something badly 10 times, try and just do it right once. And critically, don't beat yourself over the head if you get it wrong.
Yeah.
Because you've been doing this forever. It's a bad habit.
Yeah.
So it's going to take time to undo.
And,
so that's
and celebrate those times when you don't do it, you know.
Yes.
Then those are the moments you're like, oh gosh, even if it was one time in the whole week.
Yes.
Really important.
Really celebrate. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Because you'll want to do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Do we have time just a little bit to say about how Marshall Rosenberg would say we share our feelings and our needs? Because I think that's really useful.
Yes.
I did the foundation training, and it's so hard to do, but you can almost have it on your fridge. I did for a while with these little prompts that you can remember to try and communicate in this way.
Well, you might want to add. I mean, what I'll give you here is the framework, which is a 4-stage framework. And in the 3-hour workshop, and it's so entertaining. I mean, he really is. I think he passed away in 2014. He was an international peace negotiator. You know, this stuff is really important stuff at all levels of our society. And he uses the puppets, the jackal and the giraffe, as you'll know. And the giraffe language is the kind, compassionate language, not always nice, because it's very straight talking, but the language of compassion. And then the jackal is the language of violence and destroys connection. So he's really amusing, and I love watching him. So the framework is that he says when you want to talk about something that's problematic to you, you have to observe something concrete. And you hear him talking with the participants. They come up with all this intangible stuff that's their own opinion, that's a judgment of theirs, that's open to question. It is not concrete, and he keeps them going till they get something concrete, something observable, something that was done or not done. You said you'd make me a cup of tea. You didn't make me a cup of tea. You know, that's something that wasn't done, and it can't be argued with. You said that when I do certain things, I sound like my mother. You know, concrete. You said it, concrete. You said you would put the washing in the washing machine, and you haven't. Concrete. So that's the first stage, and it's not easy to get to that because we are judgment-making creatures. So that's the first step. The next step is to use the simple words "I feel," and not "you make me feel," because that is blaming language. It's "I feel." So this is me taking responsibility for my feelings. And it is not blaming another person, because a sure way to bring the other person's defenses up is for them to feel blamed or attacked. Yeah. So I feel when you don't make me a cup of tea, I feel alone and cared for. Which takes us on to step 3, which is I need. I need to feel that sense of connection to you. I miss you.
Yeah.
It's important to me. So that's point 3, I need. And then point 4 is the request. So, you know, that cup of tea might not seem important to you. It's so important to me. I'd love it if you make me that cup of tea when I come in from work.
Yeah.
So that is it. And it is not easy to do because, believe me, we bring in all of our stuff. But it is possible to do. And everything is much more possible when you've got the skills and a map. Yeah. Isn't it? Don't you find?
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot here that's about skills and knowing what to do.
Yeah. That's such valuable work.
That, Rebecca, is a real bare bones description of nonviolent communication, a language of compassion. I don't know whether you'd like to add on anything there because
no, I think it's just that you can use the children as well. You know, when you leave your clothes all over the floor, I feel tired because I've got to pick them all up. Would you help me pick them up? You know, so you kind of just saying how you feel, what you need, and then have a request. And
yes,
the basics. I think going too deeply, it gets too difficult to even try. But if you have those few sentences, when you, I feel, could you, kind of is the basis of it.
Yes.
Yeah. And, you know, there's lots of little videos you can go on to watch and learn how to do it. And I know there's loads of groups, there's probably hundreds that have popped up now with all that's going on that you could connect with and practice this way of speaking.
Yes.
You know, and if you and your partner are serious about really supporting your relationship at this time, you know, commit to try it out at night.
Mm.
Just say, oh, let's have a go at speaking in this way and have a go at
Yes.
trying it out.
Yes, so I really do think that this is a resource. I hope people will see this as a resource combined with the additional resources to keep dipping into this, to take care of your relationship. This is intended for repeated listening, and as something of a map for you to refer back to.
Great. Thank you
Um,
so much, Nicola.
and we have talked about maybe doing some webinars, but it would be useful to know what people want. What would they find useful? What do they need? What do they need to know more about? What needs more explaining?
Wonderful. I'll be sharing this on various social media platforms, and I know it'll be up on the International Attachment Network site, and I'll probably share it in my Facebook sites and Instagram. So if anybody has anything they want support with, please do let us know, and then we can create more of these to support.
Yes, and I'll give my put my email address in there
Great.
so that we can collate any feedback and see what else is needed.
Yes, I'll put all of Nicola's details underneath anything that I'm busy sharing as well. So
I'm
Nicola, thank
conscious I wasn't looking at the camera.
you.
And I've been looking at you, Rebecca, which I hope translates into looking at the camera. But
Yeah, no, it's quite hard, isn't it, to know where to look? But no, that was absolutely wonderful, and I think it'll be really supportive for not only families and parents, but I'm hoping schools will share this as well, so it can, you know, reach a really broad audience
yes.
who really help at the stressful times. So thank you again for all your
Oh,
time and wisdom.
thank you.